Just check it works. Yeah? Yep.
Ladies and gentlemen, can I ask you to take your seats? Please take your seats.
Out of chaos. These days, the origin of the universe is explained by proposing a Big Bang, a single event that instantly brought into being all the matter from which everything and everyone are made. The ancient Greeks had a different idea. They said that it all started not with a bang, but with chaos. Was chaos a god, a divine being, or simply a state of nothingness? Or was chaos, just as we would use the word today, a kind of terrible mess, like a teenager's bedroom, only worse? Think of chaos, perhaps, as a kind of grand cosmic yawn, and as in a yawning chasm or a yawning void. Whether chaos brought life and substance out of nothing, or whether chaos yawned life up, or dreamed it up, or conjured it up in some other way, I don't know. I wasn't there, nor were you. And yet, in a way, we were, because all the bits that make us were there. It is enough to say that the Greeks thought it was chaos, who, with a massive heave, or a great shrug, or hiccup, vomit, or cough, began the long chain of creation that has ended with pelicans and penicillin and toadstools and toads, sea lions, seals, lions, human beings and daffodils, and murder and art and love and confusion and death and madness and biscuits. Whatever the truth, science today agrees that everything is destined to return to chaos. It calls this inevitable fate entropy, part of the great cycle from chaos to order and back again to chaos. Your trousers began as chaotic atoms that somehow coalesced into matter that ordered itself over eons into a living substance that slowly evolved into a cotton plant that was woven into the handsome stuff that sheathes your lovely legs. In time you will abandon your trousers. Not now, I hope. And they will rot down in a landfill or be burned. In either case, their matter will at length be set free to become part of the atmosphere of the planet. And when the sun explodes and takes every particle of this world with it, including the ingredients of your trousers, all the constituent atoms will return to cold chaos. And what is true for your trousers is, of course, true for you. So the chaos that began everything is also the chaos that will end everything. Now, you might be the kind of person who asks, but who or what was there before chaos? Or who or what was there before the Big Bang? There must have been something. Well, there wasn't. We have to accept that there was no before, because there was no time yet. No one had pressed the start button on time. No one had shouted, now. And since time had yet to be created, time words like before, during, when, then, after lunch, and last Wednesday had no possible meaning. It screws with the head, but there it is. The Greek word for everything that is the case, what we would call the universe, is cosmos. And at the moment, although moment is a time word and makes no sense just now, neither does the phrase just now, at the moment, cosmos is chaos and only chaos, because chaos is the only thing that is the case. A stretching, a tuning up of the orchestra. But things are about to change very quickly.
With the greetings of Mr. Stephen Fry. We contacted Mr. Stephen Fry some months ago to come and read from his new retelling of the Greek myths. And the Greek myths are, of course, stories that are full of foundational moments, but also of strife. The gods in the Greek pantheon are really full of envies and jealousies, etc. So what we would now call the human condition is also projected very much there. Now, we asked him to come and read for us here these 2 pages out of this book, because we said we're in Europe at a sort of foundational moment again. And to really tune down to what foundational moments might mean, you have to, I think, first calm down a little bit and say where, at what level are things actually changing. And so all day yesterday, for the people who are new in the hall and were not there in the Congress yesterday of this Congress of The Hague 2018, part of what was explored is where are the deeper changes currently occurring, and how as Europeans, as people of the European movement, but also people who are very much in the European arena, like all of you, how can we discuss this? How can we find new language? How can we retell the stories that we need to tell each other about what is fundamentally going on now? Hence this little opening for you to also calm down after all the buzz that was going on already. Welcome on behalf of the European movement. There will be formal welcome words first. We have 2 special guests. Well, one is actually the host of this event. This beautiful hall, the Ridderzaal, the Hall of Knights, is hosted to us today by the Senate of the Dutch States General. And so the first speaker that will say a word of welcome on behalf of the Dutch Parliament will be Joris Bakker. And I'm trying to find where he's seated now. Joris, the floor is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Senate of the State General, indeed I would welcome you today in this very fitting place for the celebration of the European movement. In this hall, the 9th May of May 1948, 70 years ago, the Congress of The Hague started its sessions. And the Congress is considered by most as the first federal movement of momentum of a federal movement in European history. And of course, the start of the European movement itself, in a way. I assume my humble role of host with a great personal pride, as I've been member of the European Board in The Hague somewhere in my 20s, and as you may have guessed, that's some time ago now. And would I have ever guessed that I would be the host and have the honor bestowed upon me to stand here in front of you? No, I wouldn't. But it's a great pleasure to do. And the European, what I would call interdependence, is even more ancient history than the one you celebrate today, because in this hall, at this very location, as historical data suggest, it existed already a stronghold as a stronghold of the kingdom of Charles Martel and Charles the Great, respectively. And this Ridderzaal, Hall of Knights, as you mentioned in English, was constructed much later in the 13th century. And in this hall, the annual ceremony takes place at the opening of the Parliament. You may have guessed the 2 seats there are for the King and the Queen. And it's a joint session between the Parliament, the House of Representatives, and the Senate here at the Binnenhof, chaired by the President of the Senate, who couldn't be here, unfortunately, so I will stand in for her. It's held every year, and why are we chairing it? It's so arranged in the Constitution. The Senate consists of 75 members. It's part-time. We have 1 session a week at this other side of the court, and we debate the well-being of our citizens as co-legislator. And I see a colleague here on the first row, so it's not only 1 day a week, it's sometimes more. And for yesterday and today's meeting in your Sharing Europe, you've chosen an interactive participation, a kind of agora, a Greek idea of sharing Europe on a market. And it's a bit of order in the chaos, maybe the chaos that Frey mentioned. And you continue in the same spirit as that marketplace and your original Congress here in engaging people. And I think that, speaking for myself on a personal account, I think that's the right track, because you can only assume its challenges successfully if it engages people at the market square to support, to ensure the unwavering support for the European dream. Now let us return to this place in 1948. Like today, one of my former colleagues crossed the street to attend the meeting of the movement in Statu Nationalis. He was the former Minister of the War Cabinet, Peter Kerstens, and he was known to be an outspoken federalist, like many more at the time, because they were aspiring to build a peaceful Europe after the devastating world wars that raged on this continent, and this continent including Russia and beyond. And he would have been surprised if he would attend today and see that so many challenges of the post-war years are again on the agenda in a different shape, in a different disguise. But we have again identity-based politics. We have monetary volatility. We have trade wars again. So many of these challenges, new and old, and now we can add climate change, cyber wars, influence of global companies, and migration. Despite the overall high support for the EU as a project in all member states, and every statistic indicates that, it's the challenge for any local politician, whether it's Senate, whether it's House of Representatives, to reconcile those who feel left out, rightly or wrongly blame the EU for that, and those, like myself, who believe that the EU is a condition sine qua non to effectively tackle those larger problems that need international cooperation, burden sharing, and building of a joint capacity. And the new paradigm shift that we face today in the Trump era, with new challenges, who have guessed North Korea as one of them, and with the lifelong presidency of the Chinese leader, the illiberal democracies in Turkey and places in Europe even. And for that, the democratically embedded idea is only trust and confidence building between institutions is not the only way to do it. It's also between citizens and their political leaders at all levels, but to start with as local levels. The Senate has been engaged in all efforts to make decision-making in the EU more transparent, more open, even in legislative processes where there's still some room for improvement. And we have both the House and the MPs from the House of Representatives and the Senate have launched a transparency initiative, and that is currently supported by many national parliaments and senates. It's a very well-chosen day today, also for practical reasons, because this hall and the buildings around it will be closed in 1 year's time for several years, officially for 5.5 years, but we'll see how it works out. And this is for works of renovation that have been long overdue. And I think these renovations have a symbolic resonance as well. Democracy cannot be taken for granted. Democracy is a work in progress, as is the European Union. I wish you a very inspiring and productive meeting in this hall and at other places in this city. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Mr. Bakker, for these warm welcoming words. The Senate has been collaborating very nicely also with the whole event, so we're grateful to you as EMI and as Dutch European Movement. This next speaker, who will welcome you on behalf of the European Movement family, is its president, Eva Majdal, and I kindly ask her to take the floor. Eva.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear excellencies, distinguished guests, dear colleagues, dear friends, A warm welcome to the Ridderzaal on behalf of the European Movement International. 70 years ago, a group of Europeans coming from many countries and all walks of life gathered here at The Hague to craft a convincing and common future for our continent. They left behind their political affiliations and their sectorial interests. They came here as citizens, irrespective of their nationality or seniority, their vocation or their profession. They gathered to build from the ashes of war and from the ruin of nationalism, to set the foundations of a new, united Europe. And they did that in peace. They did that holding to democratic values and solidarity. They laid down what is to be known the beginning of European integration. Indeed, this was the birthplace of the European movement. And like at every important anniversary, it is crucial that we come back here where it all started and remember where we are coming from, but more importantly, to see where we are all going now, today, and the days ahead of us. I'm extremely glad that after 70 years, we have returned once more to this famous city, to this impressive hall, to mark the occasion to celebrate our history and to look ahead, to build our future, to share our Europe, and to do it most importantly, together, united, energized, motivated. Because we are certain that what unites us, it is much more superior than what divides us. We have assembled to reaffirm our commitment to the ideals of our founding fathers and mothers, for the ideals they stood for. To restate our conviction in the values that underpin European integration. To democracy and unity, transparency and solidarity, sustainability and human rights, the rule of law. But as we remember those first steps in the long journey towards European unity, we must not forget what lies ahead of us. We live in a moment when our democracy is both threatened by those that don't believe in it and is challenged by those that it is supposed to serve. Populism is sowing the seeds of doubt, and nationalism is spreading division. Now, more than ever, we need to stand up for what we hold dear. We need to speak up for what we consider to be true. We need to come forward and be the change we want to see in the world around us. And this is why I would like to warmly thank the many Europeans present here today and the ones that have tuned in online, who daily stand for European values and defend them. And some of those Europeans on the 9th of May shared with me their vision for Europe. Their vision of Europe that says no to wars, but yes to inner peace, a peaceful Europe. A Europe that has re-established trust and connectedness. A Europe with deep democracy, closing the gap by listening to people. A Europe of no fears, a daring Europe. A bigger and large Europe with no internal borders. A Europe of sharing and cooperation. A closer Europe, a transparent one, citizens-friendly, one that engages. Ladies and gentlemen, Europe is not just institutions or nations or politicians or politics. It is each and every one of us, the citizens of Europe. It is you and me. It's the people which vision I just presented. It's the students we met yesterday at the university campus. But it's also the people that were laid off of work. It is the entrepreneurs that would come up with a new groundbreaking innovation. It's the teachers that teach to our school. It starts with us, with its citizens. And in order to have it open and inclusive and not closed, in order to break down the barriers that separate us and build the bridges that unite us, we must reconnect with our citizens. And we can do that by building webs and not walls. And I call on each and every one of us, once we leave this hall, to be even bolder and to have in mind the greater picture before us and to dare. Just like 70 years ago, we need to leave behind political affiliation, sectorial interest, and stand for Europe, share Europe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eva, and I think a strong appeal to all of us, but I think a lot of people in this hall are convinced it's daily work. But thanks for reminding us also of the threats that run through Europe as we speak, and some of the challenges that are there. I would now like to take you back a little bit, and the person who's going to do that is a young historian. His name is Felix Cross, and I try to find where he's seated at the moment. Felix is there. Can you come to the floor? Felix is actually a historian, but he also at this moment works in the parliament. And he has written a book about 2 years ago, it was published, on Churchill after the war. And in that book, this Congress of the Hague of 1948 figures prominently. So Felix, the floor will be yours in a minute.
Your Royal Highnesses, Your Excellencies, my Lords, Ladies and Gentlemen, let me first support what has just been said by extending a warm welcome to all who have come together here and to wish them a fruitful result of their labors and discussions.
I thought I'd better leave that up to Winston Churchill rather than say that myself. I wish to speak to you today about the tragedy of Europe. It is not often that words spoken by a newly ousted, elderly Tory politician from Britain on a holiday in Switzerland are worth paying any attention to. But these words were listened to intently. They were listened to all over Europe and beyond. They were listened to in disbelief, amazement, some understandable skepticism, but overall with reawakening hope. Then again, this elderly politician was none other than Winston Churchill. The year was 1946, and these simple, unadorned words, dictated by the future winner of the Nobel Prize for Literature, on board a train in neutral Switzerland, combined to make the first sentence of a momentous speech, not here in The Hague, but at the University of Zurich. Working with the darkest colors on his lush palette of language, he painted an unsparing picture of Europe's despair in just a few simple strokes. Over wide areas, a vast quivering mass of tormented, hungry, careworn and bewildered human beings gape at the ruins of their cities and homes and scan the dark horizons for the approach of some new peril, tyranny, or terror. And then, using the most vibrant colors, he put a small but tantalizingly bright spot of light on those dark horizons. He said, "Yet all the while, there is a remedy which, if it was generally and spontaneously adopted by the great majority of people in many lands, would, as by a miracle, transform the whole scene. What is this sovereign remedy? It is to recreate the European fabric and to provide it with a structure under which it can dwell in peace, safety, and freedom. We must build a kind of United States of Europe. Now, at this point, I could tell you that this speech changed the world, like a catchy airport book title, but I won't, because it didn't. Because speeches alone, as Churchill never tired of reminding his audiences, never do. What the speech did do was set in motion an unbroken chain of events that ultimately brought us together. Literally, you and I, all of us here today. Because that autumn day in Zurich, Churchill took charge of a movement of peoples. His speech electrified the idealists all over Europe who started organizing themselves in pressure groups, demanding governmental action on European unity. And governments took notice too, even on the other side of the Atlantic. General Marshall laid out his plans for reconstruction in Europe, citing Churchill's Europeanism and his Zurich speech specifically as his source of inspiration. Delighted by that response, Churchill started molding together all those national and pan-European activist groups into a single force. He created, with the indispensable help of his son-in-law Duncan Sands, who was sat here on the first row, a team of rivals, competing with one another only for the greatest devotion to the common cause. And not long after, Churchill himself proposed an audacious scheme. He intended to bypass those national governments and bring all the vital forces of Europe together here in a conference at The Hague. The goal was to rise above platitudes and generalities. To the lofty ideals of peace and unity, he brought the gritty realism of the hardened wartime leader. The European movement became defined by that most famous of Churchillian phrases, action this day. And Churchill himself did everything in his power to guarantee the success of the conference that took place here 70 years ago. He solicited funds from big Dutch multinationals, ensured all-party support, except, of course, from the communists, arranged visas for the Germans, prepared the headline speech, and also handpicked the propaganda symbol for the Congress, the large red E, which still graces the white flag of the European movement. It has now, I think, become green. But on the eve of the conference, wrote the New Yorker, star attraction Winston Churchill descended from the skies like a beaming cherub. In his wake followed, among others, future British Prime Ministers Anthony Eden and Harold Macmillan, a rising star in West German politics called Konrad Adenauer, and a young Frenchman by the name of François Mitterrand. Just as you have come here together to cast your minds to the future, 70 years ago, a generation of Europeans convened to do the same. Much like you are gathered here today to make the voice of Europe heard, 70 years ago, leaders of thought and of action from all the free countries of Europe determined to have their lion's roar of united European resolve. And on Friday, 7 May, 1948, Churchill entered this Ritterzaal for his opening address. He began by expressing his confident hope that the countries of Eastern Europe would one day be able to join those of the West. And it would have relieved him greatly, no doubt, to see those represented here today from the countries which suffered for so long behind the Iron Curtain. He welcomed the German delegation, which the then still vindictive Dutch government only allowed into the country after Churchill applied the full pressure of his political weight. And then he turned to the heart of his message. Economic integration and joint military defense, Churchill said, must inevitably be accompanied step by step with a parallel policy of closer political unity. He reasoned, it is said with truth that this involves some sacrifice or merger of national sovereignty, but it is also possible, and not less agreeable, to regard it as the gradual assumption by all the nations concerned of that larger sovereignty which can alone protect their diverse and distinctive customs. a larger sovereignty, a European sovereignty, a Europe that protects. Like good wine, these ideas have ripened. 70 years ago, after they were first bottled, they are finally ready for consumption. One particularly skillful sommelier has already removed the cork from a bottle found in the cellar of the Élysée Palace. Now it's a matter of finding friends to drink with. I am no connoisseur, but I've heard that some German wines are among the best in the world. One of the most powerful achievements of the Congress of Europe was that it meant that the unity of the European countries is no longer a dream, but a problem of the day, the solution of which was urgent. Churchill wanted to immediately take two steps forward. The first was the founding of the Council of Europe and its embryonic European Parliament. The second was the establishment of the European Court of Human Rights, the kind of independent court which Churchill believed could have stopped the authoritarians in their tracks. And in the succeeding years, against all the odds, both came to pass. As Churchill hoped and expected, this was just the beginning of an organic process of growth. Because since the Hague Congress of Europe, in the spectacularly short period of 70 years, which in historical terms is something like yesterday or this morning, something astonishing has been achieved. Something my grandparents, growing up in war-torn Amsterdam, would not have dared to dream up in 1945. We have enjoyed 70 years of uninterrupted peace, the longest period since the Antonini emperors of Rome. The achievements of constitutional democracy, the science and the arts have brought prosperity beyond imagination. The European Union is the largest economy and the second largest democracy in the world, and it is, above all, a bastion of the rule of humane laws. This is the world that I was born into in 1992, the year of Maastricht, the year of the founding of our union. This is the world that my generation has always taken for granted, like the air we breathe and the dikes which protect us. And this is our blessing as well as our challenge. We do not know the horrors of war. We do not know the fear of the policeman's unexpected knock on the door. We do not know what it is to wait for hours to cross an imaginary line drawn on the face of the continent that is our home. We do not know what it is like to have to climb and break down a monstrous wall simply to be reunited with our brothers, sisters, children, and parents. Had we been born a century earlier, we would have been the lost generation. Instead, through no merit of our own, we became the Erasmus generation. And just as it seemed, it could hardly get better. Just as it seemed that we had arrived at that bright, tiny dot of light marked on Churchill's dark horizon in Zurich in 1946. Just as it seemed that we would forever bask in it. All over Europe, the forces of misguided nationalism, isolationism, xenophobia, and even anti-Semitism are rearing their despicable heads again. Growing stronger by the day and manifesting themselves ever more brazenly against their common natural enemy. The antidote that they must destroy in order to spread their doom again, the European Union. The survival of our European project ultimately turns on one simple question. It is a question that Churchill asked 70 years ago. Here it is. Is the only lesson from history to be that mankind is unteachable? I propose that we answer this question. And I propose that we say no. President John F. Kennedy said that Churchill, by his art as an historian, has made the past the servant of the future. I propose we all do the same. The European Union, which history has handed us, the unfinished product of the deliberations in this very hall 70 years ago, is not without imperfections. But its faults are just that, imperfections on the face of virtue. Our union represents an ideal of high hope which is in danger. It requires all that every European can give it, now. And there is no need to reinvent the wheel. The past can light our path of uncertain steps on a new and uncharted course. We can write our next chapter with material from the capacious filing cabinet of our common history. We know where the dangers lie. We know what to avoid. We know what not to do. We must battle complacency. We must fight democratic backsliding within our union as fiercely and as decisively as we can. And if we were able to build a single market that works, together we can create one that works for all. If we were able to pool our most valuable natural resources, then together we can protect them from depletion. We, the Erasmus generation, and all who will join us, must make our voice heard in defense of our union, which in its hour of danger seems more precious than ever before. Action this day. Thank you.
No room for personal or party jealousy. If there is rivalry of parties, let it be to see which one will distinguish itself the most for the common cause. No one can suppose that Europe can be united on any party or sectional basis, any more than that any one nation could assert an overweening predominance. It must be all for all. Europe can only be united by the heartfelt wish and vehement expression of the great majority of all the peoples, in all the parties, in all the freedom-loving countries, no matter where they dwell or how they vote. We seek nothing less than all Europe.
Thanks very much, Felix. Thanks, Mr. Churchill, from beyond the grave. Echoes in this hall, and we like to share them with you, because all of us have been looking at this old footage, also looking at the new text, and there's a lot of linkages and connections. So thanks, Felix, for sharing this with us. I would now, without further ado, like to give the floor to our next esteemed speaker, Mr. Donner, who is the Vice President of our State Council. I'm saying it wrong. This is one of these blocks after you haven't slept enough. Anyway, the Dutch people know him very well because he was also former Minister of Justice in several cabinets. We're very honored that you're here. And we're intrigued by the title of the speech that you gave us, because that was Europe Beyond the Current Frames. So we're very, very interested to hear what you have to say on that point. Mr. Donner, the floor is yours.
Thank you. 10 years ago, our fathers came here to discuss their vision of the future. Europe had barely survived 2 world wars in one lifetime. Millions of displaced persons were on the move. Violence was still rampant in many parts of Europe. All European nations faced the immense task of reconstructing society from the ruins of absolute war. And over it all lay the shadow of yet another totalitarian regime that threatened to engulf Europe. Our forebears met not as representatives of nations or heads of state, but as representatives of all sections of society, in search for mutual comfort and support. They came with an idea to unite Europe, and they left with hope. Churchill captured the spirit of the moment as you just heard it. Much has been achieved since then, but words and good intentions were not enough. 2 years later, the feeling of despondency was even deeper, and there was a growing sense that war once again was inevitable. It needed a bold step to break out of the mold of national thinking. The agreement to put the coal and steel industry, the powerhouse of national economies, under a common administration turned a zero-sum stalemate into a non-zero-sum dynamic. That started the miracle of a deeply fractured continent boiling over with mistrust, hatred, and painful memories, turning itself into a striving area of prosperity, democracy, open society, and the rule of law. Now, 70 years later, we have come back here to the same place, to commemorate, but also to reaffirm the spirit of that time. Our material situation has improved beyond what was imaginable for our forebears. But in some ways, we are as confused as they were. We find ourselves once again in a stalemate. The long period of peace, prosperity, growth, and expansion of the European Union that culminated in the years after the fall of communism has soured in 10 years of stagnation and crisis. Social and economic differences are increasing. People feel insecure and threatened, and the Union seems impotent to act to offer protection. Growing segments of the electorate are turning towards the Pied Pipers of nationalism, closed borders, and national control that have sprung up all over Europe. In a growing number of member states, the debate over how to meet the daunting challenges of climate change, of limited natural resources, growing social differences, security threats, and of a digitized society is drawn into the false antithesis of national autonomy versus European cooperation. The originality of the European construction was and is that member states and the Union mutually reinforce each other. The driving force behind the European project was not the ambition for power, but the increasing awareness of the powerlessness of national states in the face of international markets and a cross-border society. Take European cooperation away, and these shortcomings and limitations will soon reappear. Sovereignty is a hollow concept in a world where each state is dependent on others for its prosperity, security, and viability of policies. Reasserting autonomy will not solve anything, but only adversely affect the capacity of both the Union and its member states to cope with the challenges of modern society. If European cooperation would disappear, it will not result in the reappearance of viable national states, but in a general impotence and the marginalization of all European states. It's not just prosperity and stability that are at stake, but open society, cultural diversity, and the rule of law itself. Mutual relations between autonomous national states are governed by might instead of right. National states that are in constant need to compete with their neighbors will try to assert political union and social conformity over democratic and cultural diversity. Economic interests and the fears of popular majorities will easily take precedence over individual rights, ethnic diversity, and the interests of minorities. These darker tendencies in society have been kept in check by common purpose, mutual trust, and common institutions of the rule of law, the European courts, the charters, and the European legal order. However, these run the risk of being among the first victims if states revert to national autonomy, as we can see happen even now in some member states. Even in the United Kingdom, it seems as if the single most important issue in the Brexit negotiations is how to get away from the jurisdiction of the court in Luxembourg. But the essence of Europe is not institutions or markets. The essence is people. The hope that was kindled 70 years ago was not for an institutional construction, nor for free markets and profits. The hope that was born was for a future in which all Europeans, for the first time in living memory, could live their lives free of fear and want, free to express their opinions and convictions, and free to move around, meet, get to know each other, and cooperate across frontiers. As Monet wrote, nous ne coalisons pas des États, mais nous unissons des hommes. We are not federalizing states, but uniting people. Europe has realized that hope in many respects, proof of which is the long period of peace, stability, and growing prosperity, proof of which are the people that circulate daily in the European Union, students that travel abroad, workers that find employ elsewhere, friendships, marriages, and contacts across borders. Proof of which is this conference itself and your presence here. But for too long, the realization of the hope and dreams of that earlier time has been left to national governments and national politics to implement. We thought that once the process got going, Europe would realize itself on its own, because the logic and the benefits would be self-evident. However, Europe isn't realized by itself. As the Americans say, if it's to be, it's up to me. If Europe is to be, it's up to each one of us. We are the bearers of the hope that was born 70 years ago. It's up to us to cherish the hope in our generation and to pass it on to future generations. Europe is too important an idea to leave it in the care of governments and politicians to implement. That doesn't mean that we can do without national governments and politics, nor that there are easy recipes or simple solutions. But it starts with the recognition at all levels of society that European cooperation is not part of the problem as an unwanted restriction on national policy, but part of the solution of the many challenges we face in a modern society. Part of the protection people are looking for. Part of the opportunities modern technology offers. And part of the guarantee of an open society and the rule of law. That was the idea behind the meetings yesterday, to discuss in what way cooperation can solve problems. It's now up to all of us to practice that approach in our professional life. And it's up to us to challenge the misinformation that's often spread around about the nature of European cooperation. one of the areas where European cooperation urgently has to show to be part of a solution is the area of growing social differences both within member states and between them. Growing numbers of people fall behind in the general growth of the economy and have lost faith in their capacity to improve their situation. Economic reports indicate that differences between segments of society and between regions are growing in the level of work, income, health, and education. It would seem to imply that our economies are no longer helping social integration, but affecting the opposite. Understandably, the victims of this lopsided growth feel betrayed in their hope for a better and secure future, and turn against European cooperation, which they associate with free markets and free movement. A disenchantment that can easily be exploited by national populist politicians, even though the fastest growth of differences occurs within the separate member states, and only joint action at European level offers any hope of finding an adequate answer. But such an answer has to be found if we want to turn the tide of anti-European feeling. These and other challenges we face are not simple problems that have an easy answer. And if we have an answer, it will be even harder to have it accepted and implemented. But the problems our fathers faced when they met here 70 years ago were even more daunting, and they didn't have the reassuring experience of 60 years of successful cooperation. Yet they went from here with a sense of common purpose and hope in their hearts, the hope for a future in which all Europeans could enjoy a life in liberty, security, and prosperity, free from fear and want. If they could find the strength to take up their responsibility, could we do less? Our material conditions have improved radically, and while our forebears had to take up the challenge of constructing Europe in a continent that was destructed by war and divided by barbed wire, hatred and mistrust, we live in a world where we profit from 60 years of trust and peaceful cooperation, and where we all have the possibilities we want to move around, meet who we want, and cooperate with anyone we like. That is the solid basis on which a European future can be built, has to be built. So let us honor the pioneers of Europe who met here 70 years ago by reaffirming their commitment to the hope of a united Europe. Hope in that deep sense of which Václav Havel said that it is a state of the mind, not of the world. Not the joy of things that are going well, or the willingness to invest in enterprises that are obviously heading for success, but it's rather the ability to work for something because it's good. Hope is not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that something makes sense regardless of how it turns out. That is the hope we should carry away from here. Thank you.
Mr. Donner, on a personal note, when I was a young parliamentarian facing Mr. Donner as the minister at the other side of the aisle, I was always impressed. There were moments in the parliamentary history where he could actually speak so carefully and so truthfully, and I think this is one of the speeches. Jo Leinen, sitting next to me, said already, we're going to spread this in the Euro Parliament. So this speech will have resonance, I hope, and thank you very much for being with us here today. We're very grateful. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm now going to turn off the microphone to my esteemed colleague, the Secretary General of the European Movement International, Petros Vassoulas. He will moderate the debate with 4 civic leaders, and the floor is yours, Petros.
Thank you very much, Godeliv, for everything you have done today, and thank you all for joining us. As it was already said, the process of European integration isn't just the pooling of sovereignty between nations and states. It's actually a compromise, a coming together of society as a whole. And the European movement has been built on that premise, the platform where different sides of society, citizens from all walks of life, come together to build a common future. And for that reason, we have assembled a panel that represents many of those sides of society, and we have brought them with us here to talk about the historical reflection of their contribution and their vision for Europe. If you would like to join me now, I'll introduce you one by one.
Yeah? Yeah, okay. With you.
The idea is to have an informal discussion and, time permitting, perhaps even bring you in the conversation too. Because just like we did yesterday, the concept between these 2 days, this festival we have put together, is to really listen as much as share ideas. So with me, I have Montserrat Mir, who is from the Trade Union, the European Trade Union Congress, the Confederal Secretary. I have Anna Widegren, who is the Secretary General of the European Youth Forum. I have, of course, Joanna Maycock, who some of you met already yesterday, and she's representing the European Women's Lobby. And of course I have Wijnand, who is wearing several hats, I believe, representing both Dutch industry, but also the European Association of Small and Medium-Sized Enterprises.
Yep.
If I may, Montserrat, and I'll do that, don't you worry. I'd like to start with you.
Okay.
The trade union movement, workers around Europe, has been there from the beginning, both in 1948, but throughout the process of European integration. And the contribution the movement has made is significant. I'll be interested to hear your historical reflections from the perspective of the ETUC about the contribution that workers have made to this process.
Yes, thank you. It's an interesting approach because in this construction, before was mentioned by someone that the union began as a union of steel and carbon, and both sectors are close to what supposed the labor movement means. In this construction, workers, they have played a key role. But I think that we must take into account that the levels of social protection, what we call the social model that we have now, even with all the restrictions, all the cuts that we have suffered in the last period of austerity measures, but I must remind that all those fights were done and performed by workers, by citizens, that they want to have better lives, better working conditions. If we enjoy, for example, holidays, it looks normal today, but it wasn't in the past for all. And also, if we are trying to extend those rights, is because we continue having part of our workers, our society, that they cannot enjoy those rights at the same level at the classic workers, because now the world of war is in transformation, is in continuous transformation, and we need to adapt to the situation. But in the past, of course, the workers, we have played a key role, not only with demonstrations, also being the construction of this big value that is the social dialogue. The social dialogue for us, that it doesn't exist in other parts of the world. When we visit other parts of the world, they ask very often to explain this model, this successful model. We need to say thank you to Delors also, because was one of the key players, one of the key promoters of this idea. But if now we have the capacity, very often, not always, to sit in a table and to decide the transformation of the world of work with employers and with workers is thanks to this invention, this good invention that is the social dialogue. Social dialogue as an essential part of the social model, because it's the idea of the Europe that all citizens want to live. I remember that a long time ago I wrote an article in my country. What is Europe? Europe is the place, is a feeling also, but is a place where the majority of the citizens we want to live. This Europe with security, but also with democracy, with freedom, and with transparency in all our institutions that is well demanded by our members. But I think that we are in the middle of the way. The challenge is that we need to continue this work that they have done our antecessors, the workers that have been in the streets, in the industries, in the working places, convincing the colleagues and the workers that Europe is a good idea because supposed shared prosperity means to distribute the benefits of this evolution with all the citizens.
That gives me the opportunity to ask you, what do you think are the challenges at the moment? What the labor movement is facing and is being challenged by at this particular juncture in history?
The challenges are terrible, no? But we have the chance that the labor movement and the trade union movement, we have the two sides. We are with the utopia. We are utopians at the same time. We are realistic. Some of our members, they thought in the past that when you conquer a right, that was done. And we have seen that it's not like this, that the rights we must conquer in each generation. I don't want to say that, but we need to conquer again what the majority of the citizens, they thought that was a right. Means rights are in perpetual, are perpetually questioned in that time, and the challenges that we have as a trade unions are to confront two major, I want to say, revolutions. One is the digitalization of the labor market that emerged with a strongness in all sectors, not only in the platforms, in the new digital platforms, emerge in all sectors, because there is a process of technological transformation that needs more capacity to renew the skills of the workers. There is another important revolution that is the impact of the climate change that will have an impact in workers, in citizens. And very often we see that workers, they don't see that as an emergency, as something that happens to me. It's something that happens, I don't know, in a place that there are inundations or phenomenon, but is a problem, is a challenge that we need to confront, and we need to prepare our members, our workers. We are strong as a trade unions. We have a capillary, we are everywhere. We have the capacity to arrive to the citizens, to arrive to our workers, to convince them that they are part of this transformation, because they must be part. If they are not part of the transformation, it will not be possible. Evolution cannot be done without to take into account all parties. But I think also there is an important revolution, that is the presence of women in the labor market. I think that my colleague will enter more into detail, but there is a clear need to adapt, to transform our industries, our working places, because this is a phenomenon that will not stop, and we need to to continue to remove obstacles, because women have a role to play in these European constructions, and we cannot let them out. And another that I want to remark is that the necessity to strengthen the social dialogue. This is a big challenge, because in the past have been damaged, have been suffered certain cuts or certain transformations, and we want to call for back to this idea, this strong and powerful idea that for us is key in the European construction.
There was reference just now to the social dialogue, and the relationship between the two is, of course, incremental to the unity of the European Union. But I think the role of business has also been foundational entrepreneurs, small enterprises, but also big multinationals have been there from the beginning, not just through the creation of the single market, but even before that. It's businesses that employ a lot of us, they make the products we consume, they operate across borders, they live Europe in many ways. What's your historical reflection of the role of business, of entrepreneurship, of those that really strive to build an economy for us?
Yeah, well, I think there is no doubt that the role of business in Europe has been a key role. When President Donald Tusk visited Business Europe a few weeks ago for its 60th anniversary, in his speech he thanked business for its contribution to Europe, and I think that's justified. In the first place, of course, the internal market, the euro, the concepts that are supporting Europe now, but also the implementation of the data regulation, which is turning into action today, environmental legislation, the chemical legislation on REACH. So business played an extremely important role in the economic field. But Europe is more than the economy. Europe is politics. Europe is geopolitics. Europe is values. And I think that many business leaders also played a role in explaining the other side, this side of Europe, maybe the deeper and the more important side even. That is done throughout history in Europe. It's done today by the president of my organization here. And we are stressing more and more exactly this non-economic element. And I think in many speeches today, the element of the value of Europe, which is more than the economy, more than the importance of today, is there. And I think that's also an image that we must continue in spreading. We had this week a large delegation of small and medium-sized enterprises in Brussels. We organized a program of 1.5 days, bringing them into contact with the Parliament, with the Commission, with the permanent representation, with a lot of people working in Brussels to realize Europe. Europe, we are Europe, as several speakers also said today, but we have to explain that time and again, not only to the opinion leaders and to, say, the political and economic elite, but we have to explain it to the people. Business leaders have to talk with their employees about why Europe is important for their company.
We see today a re-emergence of nationalism, and in many ways it feels that right behind that veil of nationalism there is a creeping protectionism emerging, one that runs the risk of breaking down one of the greatest achievements of the European Union, the single market. Do you experience that in your daily operation across the continent?
Well, of course we are part of the economic and European discussion, so we experience it. I've been working for 25 years in trade policy, and I've always had a global look on Europe, and also I've been looking from Europe to the world. And I think the changes in the world are massive. And as one of the speakers said, all major challenges now are international. They are no longer on the national base, which means that to tackle those issues, we need a European approach. And on top of that, the big challenge in the world now is no longer economic competition. It's no longer even political competition. But there is a number of countries, big countries in the world, big powers in the world, that are focusing on destroying what makes Europe Europe. It's no longer about the economy and the politics. It's about the rule of law. It's about the social dialogue. It's about democracy. Those elements are now attacked, the essence of the liberal society in which we are living. And that means that there is a mobilization needed in Europe. Europe needs to become more resilient, and it has to become more, there has to be more solidarity as well. Those are the two key points. I think at this moment there is a very clear and evident agenda on the international field. It's about defense, it's about migration, it's about border control, it's about trade policy. on the national field, on the internal European field, economic competitiveness, social cohesion, governance. This is an agenda which provides concrete advantages, concrete benefits for many citizens. It is easy to explain, but we simply have to explain it.
You see, all it takes is to put trade unions and business on a European movement platform, and they seem to agree on everything. Joanna, we often speak about the founding fathers, but the role of the founding mothers is ignored. Not, of course, by us. We work together on awarding every year the Woman of Europe, and it's an initiative that will hopefully continue. But I'll be interested to hear what, from your perspective, what has been the role of women in the construction of Europe, in the building of the European dream?
Yeah, thank you very much, Petros. And for the cooperation we have, really, in trying to celebrate the role that women have played and continue to play and will play a more important role, we hope, in the future of Europe as well. This year, in 2018, we're celebrating 100 years of an Act of Parliament in the UK which allowed some women the right to vote, and only some women. And I think we really have to reflect on just how far we've come on women's rights in the last 100 years. It's really a remarkable transformation in the lives of women and the rights of women. As the European Women's Lobby, we're the largest alliance of women's organisations in Europe, with members in all of the EU member states. And we came together because we recognise the importance of strengthening women's voices in the European Union construction. Equality between women and men is one of the founding values of the European Union, and the Treaty of Rome already called for equal pay for work of equal value. So we think the women's movement has been a pivotal player in the construction of the European Union, together with the trade unions and businesses, the institutions, politicians. And really together we have driven lasting change in the lives of women and men, whether it's through the legislation that Montserrat already mentioned, protection of workers' rights, part-time rights, parental leave, maternity leave, the introduction of the measures to support women's participation in political and public life. But really I wanted to stress the importance of women's contribution overall in all of walks of life and in all parts of our society. Women are contributing in their families, in hospitals, in schools, in cleaning the buildings we work in increasingly driving the buses, in working in parliaments, in law firms. And too often the contribution that women are making is invisible, it's undervalued, it's underpaid. And this is something that we work to change and to transform. I wanted to mention a little bit about what's happening today and the contribution that I think women are making today, particularly if we look at the rise of populism and the alt-right in Europe, which many people have mentioned here today. This comes with very visible threats to the European project. We really see clearly the anti-migrant, the racist agenda of those parties. But it also comes very, very front and centre with a misogynist, sexist agenda, an agenda to drive women back into traditional roles, to attack women's reproductive rights, and to kick women out of positions of power. And what we see is that the visible resistance to populism in Europe is the face of women rising up online, rising up in the streets, rising up in boardrooms, in parliaments. Enough is enough. And I am absolutely convinced that it's in unleashing and celebrating and uplifting the power of women that we will defeat this particular phase of nasty politics in Europe.
You just captured, I think, the essence of some of the challenges the women lobby and the women's movement is facing at the moment. Do you see a response from the European Union? Do you think there is the necessary ammunition put in place to defend the rights that the women's movement has acquired and advance them further?
Yeah. Really wanted to underscore what Montserrat said earlier. Rights, once won, have to be defended, and we have to continue it to go further and drive harder. I think there has been a complacency about progress on gender equality in Europe. Rightly so, Europe is probably the best place in the world to be a woman, certainly if you're a middle-class white woman. But the facts are that we have stopped progressing for 10 years in Europe. For a decade, we have stopped progressing on gender equality. And we know that because we have the numbers. We're very good at that in Europe. So we know from the Gender Equality Index that women are still very much second-class citizens in Europe. I'll just give you a few shocking facts for those who might not believe me. Women today, over their lifetime, earn 40% less than men in Europe today. This is a combination of the pay gap, of lower salaried jobs, labour market segregation, very, very big pension gap, higher rates of unemployment and poverty for women. We know that still 1/3 of all women in Europe today experience some form of sexual or physical violence in their lives. How can we talk about a Europe of peace when we know that women are afraid in their homes, in the streets, and in their workplaces still, and not enough has been done by the European Union to address and tackle this scourge of violence? We've seen with Me Too recently how that conversation has gone from the whispering or from maybe the HR department or the trade union rep into the public domain in a whole new way. And this is, for us, something we're not going to go back on, and now is the time to make that change. We think also, if we look at the issues of power, it's still more than 80% of city mayors in Europe are men. The European Parliament, that does relatively well, still has 200 more male MEPs than women MEPs. There are more than 70% of members of Parliament at national level are men. And there has been too little progress in having women in boardrooms and other positions of power as well. And the European Union has not been able to pass legislation to advance the position of women on corporate boards, for example. I promise I'm going to get hopeful later, but I just wanted to make it very clear that we have stopped progressing. And in countries like the UK and Denmark even, we've started going backwards. And one area I really wanted to insist on here is the area of the statistics which has gone backwards across the board is what we call the gender time gap. That is the contribution, the spare time that we have choice about what we use it for. This basically is a reflection of the amount of unpaid care work that women do, looking after children, looking after disabled relatives, older parents, the community. It's work that is essential and important and completely essential to the construction of Europe, the education of our children and the care of our elderly. And yet it's unpaid, it's unvalued, and it's not even seen as a contribution to society. 1/3 of all men in Europe are not contributing at all, 0, to household work and care in 2018. It's not good enough, and Europe needs to do more to help redistribute those care responsibilities between women and men, but also between the state and the individuals.
Well, at least here we have gender parity on that panel, at least, and you all had the chance to listen to our president, Eva Majdel. Anna, the future and youth, many ways, are going together, and we spent the last day yesterday discussing different sides of the conversation around the future of Europe, and the role young people have to play kept coming up. Some people see young people as an audience, but we would like to believe that young people are the ones that are supposed to be on the forefront and part of the conversations. Can you share with us your reflections about the role young people have played in the construction of Europe?
Yes, thank you. First of all, it's an absolute honor to be here today and representing the European Youth Forum in this, at this commemoration of the Congress of Europe is absolutely a great privilege. What brings us all together here today really, and also for those who stood us before us here 70 years ago, is the common cause, the cause of Europe. And this is something that the European Youth Forum is obviously incredibly passionate about, and young people in general. We look at today, as it was already mentioned, that we are by birth the first generation that really, we feel European, we believe in Europe, and it is something that unfortunately sometimes is even taken for granted. But the Youth Forum would also not be here today, was it not for the commitment that was made 70 years ago here to Europe, to our fundamental rights, to human dignity, to the rule of law, and also creating, of course, the European movement. But beyond this, I mean, the European movement and what happened here, I wanted to exactly take a moment and think about the role of young people and what have they done. The young people exactly that you were mentioning is that leaders today keep wanting to invoke, but not necessarily involve. If it weren't for young people and youth organizations, we would not have the Erasmus program. And that millions of Europeans today are enjoying and actually learning from. That is sometimes called one of the biggest successes of the European Union. We would not have such a commitment to openness, to tolerance, to solidarity across Europe. Young people are always at the forefront in trying to fight for people's rights and fight for and trying to progress our societies and build our societies. Of course, through the decades of progress and achievements, there's also been some stumbling blocks. And somewhere, sometimes the voice of young people, or at least the fact that they were being listened to, was lost along the way. During yesterday's discussions, exactly, we heard time and time again how young people are not as present as they should be, how they don't engage in traditional politics, how in the last European elections the turnout for young people was very, very low. Of course, I am not going to contradict this, but of course there are things that have contributed to that. There are structural barriers that systematically exclude young people from being able to fully participate in our democratic societies. And these barriers are also, I mean, of course, there's these positions of power that are very, very much reinforced and reinforcing and being built around themselves, excluding not only women, but also young people. And barriers that, yeah, exactly, that make sure that decisions that are being taken for current priorities without actually taking into consideration young people's interests and their futures. But we would not be here today if, and I would not be here standing and fighting that we need to break down these barriers. Just as 70 years ago there were barriers, people breaking them down throughout the history, you know, young people taking the lead in trying to fight against the Iron Curtain and try to, making the fall of the Berlin Wall happen. All these barriers have always been broken down and very much led by young people. But this is still happening today. We are eager to shape Europe and eager to participate. But when there are barriers, we make sure to participate in other ways. We saw with refugees, young people took the lead in welcoming refugees into our local communities and actually making sure that they had a place to stay and standing up and protesting and making sure that also to open their own doors and their own houses and got self-organized. They stood up for the values that Europe claims that the continent that we should be, and stood up in places where you would expect that the government should have taken action. We're also taking the lead in fighting for tolerance. In Ireland, we saw how hundreds of thousands of young people came together and made same-sex marriage a reality. And today, I think of and stand with all the young women going back home to cast their ballots. The fact that young people are being called apathetic is absolutely not true. Young people are here to actually engage, to truly be part and building Europe. But the Europe that we see today is not the Europe that we believe it should be. It should not be a Europe that leaves people behind. We want a Europe that actually caters for everyone's rights, that rights should not be privileges that are only catering for the very few, the very privileged. Anyways, I'm sure we have...
in typical efficiency, you answered both my questions at once. But But that allows me to actually go into perhaps a more optimistic side of the conversation and hear a bit about your vision for the future of Europe and the direction we should be taking as we are rebuilding our union.
Yes, it's a big challenge, but we have proposals because we, the trade unions, we have as variety, as diversity, as Europe is diverse. We have all in one, but we need to speak with one voice. And in coincidence with the 60th birthday of the Union last year, we have tried to define which priorities our workers, our citizens will need, and with which tools, which instruments, means proposals that we want to launch. One is investment in sustainable growth. We are calling to create quality jobs, but we need public and private investment to do that. And also, we need to create jobs. We need to create occupations, to transform the old jobs and to create new jobs. At the same time, we need to strengthen the public services because are on the heart of the European construction also. Public services means public services for all citizens, the poor, the rich, and the ones that arrive, the migrants, for example. There is a big challenge that we have in Europe on that. No? Another is the pay rise. We are running a big campaign that will be with us for long, I think, until we achieve that Europe needs a pay rise. What means that? We think that in this European construction, we need to redistribute the riches of Europe and we need to have better wages. Europe needs a pay rise means an upward convergence. We know that they are parts of Europe that they have good conditions, good wages, good salaries. But we cannot accept a European construction with those asymmetries. We cannot accept that to do the same job in the same company, you are paid less, very often 4 times, 5 times less, if you produce this car in Czechia or if you produce this car in Germany. That is a challenge that we have, and we have proposals to reduce these inequalities or to end these inequalities with this campaign, with those proposals that we have launched to the Commission, to the workers, and also we want a just transition, not only for climate. What means just transition? Very often they ask, what means? You are trying to include that in the Paris Agreement, we succeed in the preamble. What means? Means that the transition must be done with decent work, with good wages, with good social protection, and without not letting no one behind. Means just transition, not only for climate, for the digital transformation. There's another transition, and we need to have those key elements on board. At the same time, we need a more social Europe and stronger social rights through a strong European pillar of social rights. We achieve. The social pillar was proclaimed. The origin was our demand, Europe needs a new path. You remember that campaign that we have launched 3 or 4 years ago, the new path for Europe, where we have been asking to dedicate the 2% of the GDP to the social dimension of Europe, not only in infrastructures, also in investments, in education, in all. And it seems that the Commission have listened and adapting our proposal with this social pillar that we expect that we achieve the main elements of this pillar because, as you know, it's an umbrella of legislative initiatives. At the same time, we want actions, and we are trying to propose actions to fight the social and wage dumping that exists in Europe. It's not good that we compete with this basis. We cannot compete based on wages, on low working conditions. We don't want to be like other parts of the world. We want to ask them to be like us. And for that, we need to contribute to invest in development, to avoid that the migrants must move, the refugees must move because they don't have opportunities in their countries. That's an important. The Europe of the security cannot consist in to put walls in the sea, must consist in to receive well the migrants in a holistic approach, at the same time investing in the origin countries to try to avoid these massive movements of workers.
Indeed, indeed. Thank you very much.
But our main challenge to fight against inequalities in Europe, our main challenge.
Of all types, indeed. Renan, the vision of business for the future of Europe.
Yeah. Well, I think there is an evident agenda for Europe. It's determined, I think, by the international field and internally by the inequality, and it has to be addressed. The international agenda has to be reinforced, as I just said, defense, borders, migration, trade policy. There is a lot to do, a lot of pressure, a lot of completely changed circumstances in the world. The second point is stressing the values, stressing why Europe is Europe, and that has a lot to do also, again, with inequality. And then there is, if you want to bring about this international agenda and this more equality-oriented approach, you need a very strong economy. You need an international competitiveness in a totally different environment. And it's no longer only about whether you can compete as a company, but it is also whether the EU, as one of the three players, besides the US and China, can play its role in the world. And if you don't play the role, then you are the ball with which is played, so there is no choice. That means a lot of accent on innovation. It means that we have to move forward with the euro, that we have to move forward with the economic and monetary union, and we also have to tackle, as was just discussed, the apathy. We discussed whether there was yes or no apathy among the youth. I think the whole Brexit drama is partly due to an incredible complacency and apathy among many people and many companies also in the UK. And we have before us central discussions leading to the European elections next year. And I think there is a great need for a mobilization of those who believe in Europe to really prepare the discussions, because it's going to be fundamental. It is the next mandate of the Commission, the Council and the Parliament, next 5-year mandate, that is determining the future direction of Europe to 2030, 2050. That means that we have to have a look at the narrative. I think, I haven't been there, but I understand there has been a lot of discussion on the narrative on Europe yesterday in this conference. I think that the old narrative still has an incredible value, but it has to be retold in new wording. And I think we had two beautiful examples of Felix Cross and of Piet Hein Donner of the way you can translate the old story into new wording and reach people. And then a last element is we have to show to our people that all countries participating in the European Union have real influence in Brussels. Brussels is not something above in the sky that throws down regulations and directives. It is a common process where indeed the common sovereignty of Europe is every day translated into action and generally in equilibrated and useful action. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Joanna, your vision, sharply.
So the good news is that we know what works, actually, and that in taking measures to support more gender equality, we are also doing all that is necessary to create a more equal society, a more sustainable society, a happier society, and a healthier society. So you can achieve many things by addressing gender equality if you do it in a meaningful and a serious and a transformational way. The first thing that we would absolutely demand, and we're seeing that's already starting to happen, is an end to austerity. Austerity has been a political, social, economic disaster for Europe, and it has been doubly a disaster for women. And multiply that many times if you are a woman, a minority woman, a Roma woman, a woman of colour, or a woman with disabilities, or an older woman. What we need to do, and we talked about it a little bit in the Agoras yesterday, is to build an economic and social model that values care, that values caring for each other, for ourselves, and for the planet, that puts that caring for children and parents, the planet and each other, people with disabilities, not as an afterthought, but actually as a central purpose of our economic model. This means investing in social protection and social infrastructure. It means ensuring that European budgets support that kind of investment. that the European Investment Bank and the cohesion funds are really thinking about the gendered impact of the kind of money that they're spending. It means that our economic indicators have to allow for national governments and local authorities to invest in these critical areas and not punish them for doing so. It means looking at our tax and social security systems anew to understand the gendered nature of our financial systems, which are almost devoid of women in decision-making, by the way. It means also legal measures to redistribute care between women and men, but also between individuals and the state. And at European level, it means supporting the work-life balance measures and package which is in place at the moment. It means absolutely tackling workplace harassment and violence against women, which must not have any part in any workplace or any street or any public transport system in Europe. It means, for us, the ratification and implementation of the Istanbul Convention, which is a Council of Europe convention to end violence against women, and which we've seen visible opposition to throughout Europe. But the European Union needs to take a lead in that. It means introducing special temporary measures to advance the representation of women in our parliaments and our boardrooms. But we know what we have to do. It's a case of political will. And for us, and here in this room today, it's also about a convergence, a collaboration, renewed alliances. And what I really gain hope from, I'd really concur with Anna, is there's an unprecedented engagement of citizens, an unprecedented new alliances and new ways of working that can move people, as a movement must and should. There's new ways of listening, learning, and building innovative solutions together. I think we all know that no one person has the solutions for the future of Europe. This gives us opportunities to renovate and renew and deepen our democracy in very, very new ways, to shift power away from a centre which is no longer seen as relevant, to actually dig deep down across our societies and between the people in Europe. So not only can we do it, but we have to do it, and we know how to do it. And it will make a much more sustainable, happier, healthier, resilient Europe a better place to live.
Thank you. Anna, you get the last word. What is the vision of youth for Europe?
Vision for of Youth for Europe, it's Europe that puts the citizen at the center and does not leave anyone behind. I think this has been resonating quite strongly throughout the panel, and this is absolutely, it's a Europe which does not leave us in a worse off than our parents, a Europe where resources are spent in a sustainable way, where public governance isn't made to systematically exclude us, where, as I mentioned before, rights are something for everyone and not privileges that only a few can enjoy. We want a Europe where decisions are made about society, about the environment and the economy that are made to contribute to sustainable development so that we develop in a sustainable way. A Europe where the days of politicians only engaging with young people in a tokenistic way or through a photograph, checking the box, having talked to young people are over, and where young people can be part, young people are able to vote at 16, where not only 0.5% of parliamentarians are under 30. Where education is inclusive for everyone and free, and the rights are rights and inviolable and inalienable. But young people and youth organizations, one of the big things is this is what we want, but of course we don't want to be alone in this. We want to, and I think this part of partnerships and dialogues and everyone coming together is truly something that we want to be together with everyone, with the whole society to build Europe. And it should start from us here in this room, and to bring this forward and actually exactly go out, share Europe and bring Europe and build it together and be that continent that we know we can be, and actually make sure that we live up to what we have promised.
Truly inspiring words by everyone on the panel, and that's exactly the spirit of the European movement, and the work we've done in the last 70 years is to bring together all sides of society for a Europe that we want to achieve, for a better Europe. I did promise you the opportunity to ask a question, but I think that time might be spent better listening to some music, because culture and art has also been an integral part of the construction of Europe. So before we give the floor to our keynote speaker, I'll pass again the microphone to Godelieve, and I thank very much our panelists for the truly inspiring words. Thank you very much.
I'm looking at our technicians now, because we might have a little changement, or this is not necessary. Because also to honor our minister who's just arrived, our Minister of Interior, Vice Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister, I should say. She is in a very busy meeting of ministers, actually just across the road on a special report on the MH17 disaster. So we're actually happy that you could make it across the road to be with us, but you said you insisted to be here because of your own passion for Europe and for civic initiatives. So in honor of you, of everybody, the esteemed guests here, all our colleagues and all the friends have come from all over Europe, we have two special songs by a very special singer, Azelina Calister. She's actually one of my absolute favorites, and she's also going to sing one of the favorite songs that is straight from the heart. So I would like to ask Azelina to come to the stage with her guitarist Ed Verhoef, and I want a warm applause if they appear. I'm looking where they are. Welcome.
Hi everyone. We are so happy to be here. I'm going to be singing a song in Spanish. It's a very famous song from the singer Mercedes Sosa, and if you don't know her, she's a great Argentinian singer. And this song is about thanking life for all the gifts it has given us, for the ears, for being able to hear so many beautiful songs, for the sound of your voice, to be able to express yourself, for the feet who take you everywhere and are strong enough to carry everything, and for the laugh and for the tears with which you can express your deepest emotions. Thank God and thank life for the gifts. Gracias a la vida que me ha dado tanto, me dio dos luceros que cuando los abro, perfecto distingo lo negro del blanco, y en el alto cielo su fondo estrellado, y en las multitudes el hombre que yo amo. Gracias a la vida que me ha dado tanto, me ha dado el oído que en todo su ancho graba noche y días, grillos y canarios, martillos, turbinas, ladridos, chubascos y la voz tan tierna de mi bien amado. Gracias a la vida que me ha dado tanto, me ha dado el sonido y el abecedario hermano, y luz alumbrando la ruta del alma del que estoy amando. Gracias a la vida que me ha dado tanto, me ha dado la marcha de mis pies cansados, con ellos anduve ciudades y charcos, valles y desiertos, montañas y llanos, y la casa tuya, tu calle, tu patio. Gracias a la vida que me ha dado tanto, me ha dado la risa y me ha dado el llanto, así yo distingo dicha de quebranto, los dos materiales que forman mi y el canto de ustedes, que es el mismo canto. Y el canto de todos, que es mi propio canto. Thank you. So before we leave, we do one more song, and it's a Dutch song, and I think it fits very well. The idea that there are a lot of days in the air, days that can make it, that give us time and opportunity to change things and make things flow a little bit more. De lucht zit nog vol dagen. Ik heb te lang getreuzeld, veel te lang, veel te weinig gedaan. Altijd maar, ja maar, altijd ach, laat maar. Het is duidelijk, dit moet zijn gedaan. Want de lucht, die zit nog vol dagen. Dagen van nou, dagen van later en dagen die gisteren kunnen dragen. Ja, de lucht zit nog vol dagen. Ik zat te lang om een antwoord verlegen, zonder dat ik wist wat de vraag ook weer was. Kan het niet harder, kan het niet mooier, kan het niet vlugger, kan ik er vanaf? Want de lucht, die zit nog vol dagen. Dagen van nou, dagen van later en dagen die gisteren kunnen dragen. Ja, de lucht zit nog vol dagen. heb ze in soorten. De een leeft zijn leven altijd in de zon. Maar bij een ander wil het niet vlotten. Die geeft het al op voordat hij begon. En ik ken mensen die bergen verzetten. Ze geven niet op, nee, ze gaan nog een keer. Soms tegen beter weten en altijd proberen ze het weer. Want de lucht, die zit nog vol dagen. Dagen van nou, dagen van later. En dagen die gisteren kunnen dragen. Want de lucht, die zit nog vol dagen. Mooie dagen van nou en van later. En dagen die gisteren kunnen dragen. Ja, de lucht zit nog vol dagen. Dank u wel. Ed Verhoef. My name is Isaline Kalisse. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Isaline Kallister, Ed Verhoef, thank you so much. For the non-Dutch speakers, this last song was about the air is still full of days, full of promises, full of opportunities. And people, they're of all kinds of forms and shapes, but together we can basically capture the future. So thanks for this song. It was an encore, because she did not mention this before, but we're very, very happy she sang it. And also, I think I saw a smile on the face of our minister. So it's my honor and pleasure now to announce to you our Deputy Prime Minister, Madame Kaisa Ollongren, who I know personally is very much not only a European, but also somebody who's very much into the civic tissue. She was a city councillor in Amsterdam for many years and very, very strongly committed to urban innovation. So we'll have the honor to invite you to our forum.
Thank you very much. Thank you also for your kind words. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here today and to share with you some thoughts on Europe, its past, and of course its future. So on the 7th of May, 1948, in this very hall, this Knights Hall, there were 740 men and 6 women. One of them was our princess, soon-to-be Queen, Juliana. So it was mainly men that convened here to talk about the future of Europe, a Europe that at that point in time had been torn apart. It was a Europe that I think was uncertain, it was impoverished. In the words of the British historian Sir Ian Kershaw, Europe had descended into hell, and now it had to resurrect itself. It had to rebuild itself. This was the task resting on the shoulders of a now feted and illustrious generation here in The Hague 70 years ago. So among them were statesmen like Altiero Spinelli, Paul-Henri Spaak, Robert Schuman, a still largely unknown Konrad Adenauer, and of course, Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill was here. So Britain's wartime prime minister, he stressed the historic dimensions of the tasks that lay before them. And I quote, "We are here to lay the foundations upon which the statesmen of the Western democracies may stand, and to create an atmosphere favorable to the decisions to which they may be led." For Churchill, what mattered was cooperation. After the catastrophe of the Second World War, nations now had to come together. The Congress had to display strength and to offer hope to the people of Europe. And now, 70 years later, I think that we should be grateful. They did lay the foundations upon which statesmen and women of the Western democracies now stand. I don't think that The Hague had ever before or has ever since hosted a gathering that has so decisively shaped the destiny of our continent. It was on this very spot, 70 years ago, that really the first building blocks were laid for Europe's today's edifice. It was the start of a remarkable, ambitious, collaborative project, a project that, as we all know, is still ongoing, a project that, in my opinion, will always be ongoing. It's a partnership. It's unique in the world, and to many in the rest of the world, it's sometimes a source of surprise and wonder. How can countries that were torn apart by war have such a close partnership? How can countries give up their long-cherished currencies in favor of a common new currency? We Europeans, we tend to forget how remarkable this partnership is. We're accustomed to it. We take it for granted. But just think, no more war. Instead of a divided continent, Europe suddenly became a close-knitted union. It's a unique story. A continent ravaged by 2 world wars lost no time in rebuilding itself, and it grew to become the biggest trading bloc in the world. But Europe's success is, of course, much more than just economy. Those gathered at the Congress here 70 years ago, they knew this. The Congress took the initiative to work together in areas beyond the economy. Their partnership was to go deeper. It was about fundamental rights. It was to be given a sort of European protection to this important issue. So a devastating war, terrible regimes had deprived people of the most basic fundamental rights. And that would never be allowed to happen again. Europe would be more than a market. From now on, the rights of every European citizen were going to be made secure. And this was the task laid for the Congress. And Churchill put it like this: the movement of European unity must be a positive force, deriving its strength from our sense of common spiritual values. In the center of movement stands the idea of a charter of human rights, guarded by the freedom and sustained by law. So that focus on fundamental rights has been a recurrent theme in the European cooperation. So, coincidence or not, exactly 70 years after the celebrated conference here in The Hague, today, the 25th of May, marks yet another important moment for fundamental rights in Europe. Because after years of preparation, and negotiation, of course, the entry into force today of a new EU General Data Protection Regulation, the Gdpr, guarantees citizens of Europe's privacy, including the digital sphere. It's a fundamental right that the Congress at the time could hardly have envisaged in an age of telegrams and fixed-line telephones, but it's one where Europe, again, is leading the way in the world. It's a good example how the objectives of 70 years ago have lost none of their relevance. It's also an example of how we are meeting those objectives today in a rapidly changing world, and such achievements, they're sometimes obscured by the political dynamism of every day. But Europe has grown. It's grown over these 70 years. It's sort of left adolescence and entered into adulthood. A process typically marked by crises. Crises that, in the case of Europe, can sometimes be hard to predict and sometimes even hard to imagine, like the banking crisis, issues with migration, Brexit for that matter. And these are issues that don't lend themselves to the EU's slowly but surely approach. They don't lend themselves for technical solutions arrived at by treaties and by regulation. Fish quota, they present a challenge of a different order than asylum quotas for the relocations of tens, hundreds of thousands of refugees. The European project is gradually developing from an idealistic endeavor centered on peace to one about power. A power project in which nations are bound together, so to speak, to better serve their common interests in the world. We are seeing a shift from a rule-driven approach to EU politics to an event-driven approach. So Europe has to respond, and it has to respond promptly to events. Events where the stakes are often very high. That calls for decisiveness, but it also calls for initiative. It takes strong politicians to take the bull by the horns. It calls for leadership. The continued success of European cooperation depends on continual commitment and leadership from the part of politicians. Just as it did 70 years ago, European cooperation today makes great demands on politicians. It demands leadership, it demands ambition. It presents politicians with an immense task. Johan Bijen, he was a Dutch foreign minister in the 1950s. He's one of the founders of the single market, and one of our great Europeans, I think. He once said, "Politics is the art of the possible, but it should always keep its eyes fixed on what is not yet possible, and should never assume that what is desirable is out of reach." That's what I think leadership is about, keeping your eyes fixed on what is not yet possible. Leadership is courage, daring, and the ability to improvise. Leadership is delivering a strong and compelling message that forms part of a bigger picture. The message is now more important than ever. In a globalizing world in which Europe faces major challenges, in which some countries are resorting towards protectionism, in which terrorism presents a common threat to all of us. So, isn't that former urgency and desire for decisive European action more important than ever right now? Isn't it now exactly the time to talk about a broader vision? We could call for a smaller Europe focused on just core tasks. But if we take the competition we face from the rest of the world truly seriously, and if we truly wish to address the challenges of security, shouldn't we then take a different course? True cooperation means daring to look further, to see the bigger picture. It means daring to look beyond our own interest for the sake of the common good. 70 years ago here in The Hague, a group of people came together who did dare to look beyond their own interests, to look beyond here and now. The ambition demonstrated by that Congress is still highly relevant. We must dare to look ahead to the Europe of our children, of our grandchildren. We must now decide what kind of Europe we want them to live in. And with that vision of Europe before us, we could take concrete steps to make it reality. So politicians never take decisions in isolation. I'm a Democrat. I believe in the power of democracy and the power of people. And after all, politics is too important to leave to politicians. In the end, European cooperation is, as Churchill saw it, an alliance not of states but of peoples. And so ultimately it's an alliance of citizens. And it's vital to involve citizens in the European cooperation to ensure public support. Especially now, at the time of broader debates about the future of Europe, about the future of the euro. So when President Emmanuel Macron, he has underscored that. He's also underscored the importance of citizens' participation. He advocates setting up citizens' conventions where people can discuss their ideas about Europe, and where politicians can actively discuss their ideas with the citizens. He wants to give citizens greater influence, to create new ways to connect citizens to Europe. And when I served on Amsterdam's municipal executive, I witnessed ways of connecting people to Europe. There was one of 12 partnerships where in the urban agenda for the EU, it was the inclusion of migrants and refugees. And we had long discussions to explore that issue in depth. It was about the urban approach to the refugee issue. It was about our responsibility for their successful integration, because 70% of the refugees that came wanted to settle in our cities. And it was about public support for these initiatives. And at the time, I perceived a very strong sense of solidarity between these cities, towns and cities that were ready to help each other, that didn't tackle pressing issues like these with individual wish lists, but were working on solutions together with all stakeholders and across boundaries. This partnership has now borne fruit because in the shape, it has borne fruit in the shape of a European Migrant Advisory Board and an Academy on Integration. And that makes me proud. So I began by noting that 70 years ago there were only 6 women sitting in this hall. And I'm glad to see many more women today. A lot has changed in those 70 years, and thankfully many of these changes are for the better. Amid all those changes down the years, one thing has remained constant, and I think that is the ambition to work together. Here it started in The Hague, and it's gone on and crossed borders and even more borders. And that is a joint achievement, and it's something that we can all be very proud of. And I think if we keep on debating, if we keep the dialogue going, if we keep telling the larger story with conviction, I think we can face the challenges that we now have in the European cooperation with confidence. Then Europe will truly enter adulthood successfully. So I want to thank you for being here today in The Hague, the city of peace and justice. Thank you very much.
Much, Minister Ollongren, for this inspiring speech, also inspired by very concrete experiences over the years, so that is always very nice to hear true. I know that you now have to leave, so she told me earlier, she said, I don't like to come in and then sort of pop out again, but there is a debate and it is very important that you attend across the road. So we thank you once again to have been with us here. And Eva Maydel will accompany you as our President of European Movements for a minute. Thanks. Ladies and gentlemen, it has been a long sit, but I hope it was enjoyable as a celebration of this 70th anniversary of the Congress of The Hague. There is a spirit in this room. For people who have been here regularly, there is there's a sort of holy ground here, and the inspiration, I hope it has shown true in some of the interventions that you witnessed this morning. We'll have a special ending of this ceremony before we then all go to the Plein, the Parliament Square, because the new Europe is not just sitting in halls, it is actually out on the streets. Now, we're not going to leave you out on the streets just like that. We'll have a lunch set up on Parliament Square. It's a especially city lunch. It's not one of these Chateau Wassenaar that the people from the 1948 generation will remember. This is a lunch hosted to you by Van Harte Resto, which is a social foundation in the city that sets up meals to connect people that are lonely or disconnected or in other ways. And so this is what you now get served on the Plein Square with music, etc. We'll take you there after our final speaker and our final toasting moment. Now, our final speaker I'm very happy to introduce is the Deputy Mayor of The Hague, the city where it all began. Now, Mr. Tom de Bruyn, who is well known to the Dutch people, but also to the Europeans, because he used to be our ambassador in Brussels before he went from Brussels to local politics, which is very interesting. He bypassed the national level and went straight from Europe to the local level. We were discussing this yesterday, that maybe the new connections are between Europe and the local level networks. So you're the perfect embodiment of that relationship. We're very happy, and Mr. Tom de Bruyn is actually going to present a little toasting moment with a little surprise. So, Mr. Tom de Bruyn, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Godelieve. And as you said, it's already late, but still on behalf of the municipality of The Hague, I would like to welcome you to this beautiful city and this fantastic hall. Now, I had prepared a speech, but we have heard already so many inspiring voices this morning, and you're all hungry, so you want to go to lunch and pursue your meeting. So I'll skip my speech. So, thank you. But still, let me give you a very short personal reflection. As you rightly said, I spent most of my life as a diplomat and lastly in Brussels as permanent representative to the European Union. And then I went into local politics. And then I thought that I would be dealing with very prosaic problems like public transport. But to my surprise, the real big challenges that we faced were the consequences of international developments. And I'm not only talking about climate change. We are confronted with a huge task in transforming our energy production and our energy provision in the city. But I'm also talking about issues like terrorism, like radicalization in some of our neighborhoods, or like the minister was speaking about the adoption of refugees, the welcoming of refugees in our cities and providing homes and providing jobs for them. Now, that was a surprise to me, that the real challenges were the consequences of international development. But we here in the city, and unfortunately also in Europe, we can only tackle the consequences, and we have not enough instruments to tackle the causes. And that would be my big plea today. There is a lot of talk now in Europe about the future of Europe, and we have the scenarios by Jean-Claude Juncker, and we have the leaders' agenda of Donald Tusk. But what is absent in all these discussions is a real strong Europe in the world. We have to develop the instruments and a strong EU foreign policy so that we can shape our destiny ourselves. So that is my plea, and I now would like to bring out a toast, but I'm waiting for the glass. And my mother taught me that you can't make a toast with water. Okay, so let's bring a toast, first of all, to congratulate the European movement with its 70th birthday, but also to the future of Europe. Here.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, this toast we will do again also for a little photo moment. So we're waiting till everybody has a glass. We have extra staff hired for this toast to make sure that everybody gets it within the next 2 hours. Ladies and gentlemen, I suggest that in about half a minute, when everybody has a glass, we do a photo moment. This will be totally politically incorrect, Europeans toasting to Europe, but I think this photo moment we can have. So if I'm looking for the moment everybody has a glass, and if we then can all turn, maybe the photographer can come here and take one big photo of all of you.